Welcome to the Insight Thru Experience Podcast. Podcast created to provide information about what life is like inside the most specialized special tactics organization in the U.S. Air Force. In these episodes, we'll be bringing you the experiences from many of our experts, ranging from our human performance optimization staff, our combat mission supporters, as well as our special warfare operators. Our main objective with these podcasts are to provide the listener with a unique look inside our culture of excellence in hopes that you will make the 724 a future career goal. Now, sit back, relax, take some notes, prepare to hear from some of the Air Force's finest. Thank you for joining us on the Insight Thru Experience Podcast. All right, this week's going to be special. We have Bryan from the 17th Special Tactics Squadron with us this week. Bryan, it is a pleasure to get to talk to you today on the podcast.
Hey, Mr. Free, I really appreciate you having me on here. Looking forward to getting some information out there to all the guys that are interested in putting their package forward.
All right, Bryan, if you would, give the audience a brief summary of your life up to this point and how you ended up in AFSPEC War.
So I grew up in Texas. I lived there my entire life all the way till I was 24 years old. I grew up out in the country, hunting, fishing, played sports in high school, soccer and football, and obviously football is like a huge thing in Texas. So that's where I think early on the work ethic side that I have started to build a little bit. I ended up going to college there in my hometown in Stephenville, the Tarleton State University. Did 4 years there, got a kinesiology degree. And then I decided to join the Air Force shortly after. It's something that had been on my mind straight out of high school. And I had talked to my parents about it, and they both thought that, like, it wasn't a bad route to go. My dad was prior military as well, but he also wanted me to kind of put my best foot forward towards school and see how I liked it and see if I came up with any other ideas once I finished college. And then if so, they were going to support me either way, whether I chose to join the military or not. But that kept like eating at me the entire time. And I finished school and I realized that like what I had chosen to do wasn't what was meant for me. And like there was like a greater purpose out there, and I just couldn't get rid of that feeling. So I enlisted within 6 months of graduating college.
Man, that's a great background. I just want to reflect on this a moment. So you were 24 years old when you chose to enlist, and you have a degree. So why not come officer? Why'd you come enlisted?
So I met with a officer recruiter as well as enlisted recruiter, both before I finished school. And with the degree that I had, meeting with the officer recruiter, the jobs that were available to me based on my GPA that I had at the time were not anything that was appealing to me. And I left this out, but I worked in the oil field all through college, and that's what paid for my school. So I go to school Monday, Wednesday, Friday, work in the oil field Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And so I always liked working with my hands, being outside. I don't like being indoors. I don't like sitting at a computer. So kind of some of the opportunities that were put in front of me going the officer route were not anything that would be fulfilling to me. So I started doing a little bit of research. I wasn't even aware whenever I was looking at going into the Air Force that the battlefield, the airman career fields were out there. This was before it was AFSPEC War. So I started doing a little bit of research. I read about SALT-T, CCT, PJ, TACP. And the one that stuck out to me the most was TACP or combat control. So I looked at both of those, and, you know, people say it all the time, and I'm not gonna try to brush over this, but the swim thing, that just wasn't for me, and that's why I settled on TACP, and I have no regrets. Like if I went back and did it all over again, I would have done the same exact steps that I chose to get where I am today. But basically, I went into the recruiter and I just told them, hey, I've done a little bit of research. These are the career fields that interest me, and this is the specific one that I want to go into. And, you know, he was not real familiar with the TACP career field. He tried to sell me on a couple other things, and basically he was utilizing like, I can get you to basic training on this date if you choose this job. And I was like, well, I will wait as long as I need to in order to get a TACP slot. So I ended up I ended up only having to wait like 3 months, but I wasn't going to let somebody kind of sway my decision and push me in a different direction than what I knew I wanted to do.
What resonated with me when you were talking about how you made your choice was, well, I guess the question that arrives or pops up in my head is, would you say that same thing if you hadn't been at the 17th, do you think? If you stayed out in the regular ASOS world, would you still have that same opinion?
So that's a great question. And this is gonna, I'm sure that when I say this, I can speak for a lot of TACPs that are out there, but basically the research that I had done prior to enlisting and coming in and going to the schoolhouse and getting to my first ASOS, there were a lot of things that led to those decisions, and it was what I was reading about that was going on downrange and what the TACPs were getting to do. So fast forward going through TACP schoolhouse.
Bryan, what time frame was that? What year was that you're talking about?
So I enlisted in 2011, the end of 2011. And by the time I got to the ASOS, it was the 14th ASOS. By the time I got there, the last group of non-JTAC qualified TACPs were coming home from downrange. And that was kind of the transition where those guys were no longer getting to deploy and fall underneath a JTAC and actually go do a mission set. That's the transition when they were only allowing the JTAC qualified TACPs to get on those rotations. So basically, I got to the squadron and started my upgrade training, and I really enjoyed it. I wouldn't take any of that and try to do it differently. I learned a lot, and there were great guys there that were teaching me and training me, but it wasn't what I signed up for. And the opportunities that I thought were going to be there were just, and no fault of anybody's own. It's just it's the situation that I fell into. So luckily for me, I had some NCOs, a few senior NCOs that had prior 17th time, and they had done their 5 years within the 17th, and the 14th ASOS was their next assignment. So them coming into the squadron and kind of taking those leadership roles and letting me know like what was out there, that what I signed up for thinking I was going to do, it's still out there. It just takes a few more steps to get there. And that's all I needed to hear. I just wanted to know that it was still happening and somebody to tell me this is how you can do it. And I took off from there.
Awesome. So what ultimately led to the trigger to you putting in your application to come over to the ST side of the house?
So going back to the few guys that we had prior 17th coming over to our squadron, sitting down and talking with them, they would run me through scenarios at the unit. They'd run me through the sim. We'd go on cast trips, and they would talk to me about their time at the 17th, the relationships that they build, the mission sets that they got to do, and all of them pretty much stating that it was the best time in their military career up to this point. Hearing their stories, knowing that that's exactly what I wanted out of my job and what I wanted to provide, that's what drove me to, okay, I'm not a JTAC yet. I know that there are certain things that have to be checked off the list in order for me to like be approved to submit a package. One of those being 3 years time on station. At the time, I believe it was still JTAC qualified. That was a requirement. And they had done away, I don't know if this is true or not, but what I believe was they wanted at least one deployment under your belt prior to going to selection. But I think when I submitted that was not a requirement. It was a nice to have, but not a requirement. So I started getting everything in order. There happened to be a deployment that came down for me right around my 3-year mark. And I wanted to get some job experience, but I also didn't want the clock to tick. And because I know the longer you wait, the harder it is to either go, because we all come up with excuses or reasons why we shouldn't, or you're vulnerable to what the Air Force may decide they want you to do. So the opportunity came down to deploy, and it just so happened to be, I had 2 years and some change. I hadn't hit 3 years yet. By the time I came back from the deployment, I would be over my 3-year time, and there was going to be a selection that September. So I went on the deployment. I got everything out of it that I could. It was one of the best learning experiences I've ever had, although it's not what I thought I was going to be doing as a TACP. Like, I would go back and do it again because I learned a lot. And I think that it set me up for success where I am now. But when I got back from that deployment, I had 3 months before the selection. I finished my package, I submitted it, and there was no turning back.
You've piqued my interest now. What was different about the deployment that you were not expecting maybe when you got over there?
So when I deployed, we were operating from a strike cell and not going outside the wire on target. And the JTAC portion, I was getting to do the JTAC portion. We were getting to drop ordnance every day. And as far as being kinetic, I don't think ever in my entire career will I ever be that active and release an ordnance, but it was from a desk. And it's gratifying to a certain extent, and you're helping people. We were helping people, but it's not the same as already. So it just didn't scratch the itch that I had, and I knew that there was more, and I was capable of doing more.
Yeah, I kind of experienced the same thing overseas. I spent a lot of time on the ground controlling airstrikes and whatnot, but I got stuck in the same desk position as you did overseas. And what I learned, a whole lot of new technology was coming online, and we got to use that to employ fires in unique ways. So to me, that was really exciting. But I get what you're saying. Like, if that's your first time overseas, you're expecting to be on the ground in the firefight, getting to drop bombs. And when you're sitting behind the desk doing it and then going to eat chow right after you get done dropping bombs, it probably doesn't have the same effect for sure. Yeah, so let's talk about that selection experience a little bit, Bryan. I know the process is changing. In fact, we are running a 17th Special Tactics Squadron selection next week. So it's going to be different than what you went through in a lot of ways. But I think all A&S processes kind of look for the same things, and those are those attributes in somebody to highlight to us that they can be successful. So explain some of the fear that you had when you were moving into that selection process down at Herbie, if you would.
So going back to my selection, this would have been September of 2016. And I think that a lot of guys get the same feeling, but the worst part is the wait. So you submit your package, you wait the maybe week, maybe 2 weeks, you get a response saying your package has been selected. We want to take a closer look. These are the dates for selection. And then it really kicks in, and it's like, the worst part is waiting for day one to start. And then once it starts, you're in it to win it, and you're going to go until you can't go. And so for me, prior to going, I'd had an injury, an Achilles tendon injury, and I kind of had to really scale back any physical training. It didn't have anything to do or hinder me from doing job related training, but when it came to the physical aspect, and that's a real easy way to get in your head. That for sure you're going to be tested on physical capabilities. That's not the only thing, but you do know that's going to be part of it. So I think the biggest fear and probably the biggest internal battle that I had amongst myself was, I'm a month out and I'm not able to train like I've been preparing myself for this. And at the end of the day, what I had to tell myself was, like, all I can do is the best that I can possibly do, regardless of what the injury is. And it's not going to stop me from performing, but I'm going to give it my 100%. And so that was an internal battle the entire time, all the way up until day one. As soon as we started, I never even thought about it, which is just a blessing in itself. But for me, it wasn't, there was never like a fear of, like, I sure hope that I get picked up, or it's really going to suck if I don't get picked up. But it was just me telling myself and knowing myself that whatever's put in front of me, I'm not going to hold back, and I'm going to give everything that I have regardless of the event. And at the end of the day, whether it's a yes or a no, like, I left it all out there on the table. And so there's no regret on my part.
All right. So we know the story ends up being a good news story because you got picked up, but on the Bryan scorecard in the selection, How did you grade yourself as you went through the process and looking back right after it was done? How'd you feel about your performance?
So on my grading criteria, and this is because like I chose to compete against myself and not those that were around me. And like I said, each event that came up, it was a fresh start for me. And like I laid it all out there on the table. I would say, like, I would give myself an 8, and the only reason being, it would be a 10 if it was based on my sole effort, like me giving everything that I had. But there were things in there that, like, after the fact, I looked at it and I'm like, what an idiot. Like, you do something and you're like, what was I thinking? And that's part of the process. In my opinion, it's part of the process to see that, like, guys are going to mess up. You're not going to do everything perfect because there's nobody that's perfect. But like, how are you going to recover from that? And are you going to let it eat you up and trickle into other portions of what is placed in front of you? Or are you going to be able to move past it and recover and just start fresh on everything that's put in front of you?
Yeah, selection. This is why I love it. And this is why I've been running it for so long, is because I know as human beings, if I put stress on you, it's going to make something you know how to do very well. It's going to make that task very hard for you at times, especially if I can get you sleep deprived and a little bit hungry. So we all battled through that when we went through our selection processes. So I love hearing it. An eight is a good score. So that means that you did probably very well during that whole process. But I liked what you said up front. Was the hardest part for you initially was the wait. We have roughly about 12 TACPs and some EOD guys who are waiting right now, who are waiting for next Monday to get here so they start. So they probably won't get to hear this, but if you could call each one of them and give them a piece of advice right now, what would it be, Bryan?
What I would tell them is, get out of your own head. I think that we're our own worst enemies in most of these instances. And if you can take a step back and look at your training and preparation prior to submitting that package, just know that as long as you go out there and you put your best foot forward, like, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's a hire or a non-hire or a return. It's that, like, you were given an opportunity and you put it all out there for everybody to see. And, that's all that anybody can do. So there's no shame, regardless of what the end result is, and just stay out of your head.
No, that is such good advice. Give us your lowest mental moment during selection. Where were you at the lowest? Where did you hit rock bottom? How'd you pull yourself out of that, Bryan?
So going back to one of the previous questions, talking about that moment where I was like, what an idiot. We had a sim that we conducted through the selection, and had gone into the sim, they got our heart rates up. We went in there, and it was my first experience being in a dome sim. So, like, that initial, like, this is unfamiliar, kind of uncomfortable. I don't like this. You go in there, and then obviously, as you walk in the door, off to the left are all the cadre, and then you have the sim operator, and you're like, great. Now everybody's watching, and I got in there. I was unfamiliar with the controls of the system, but at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. I had one of the cadre as my GFC, and we kind of went through the scenario, and like, I did what I knew how to do, and I did it to my best ability. But I was definitely flustered, and it was after the fact that, like, we got done, and the guy that had been playing my GFC, he kind of looked at me, and he just had this grin on his face, and he was like, well, that was fun, wasn't it? And I was just like, in my head, like, our definitions of fun are not the same, but it was probably a lot of fun for him. They pulled me out of the sim and kind of went through the cadre and their debrief items, and a lot of it was stuff that, like, I know better. Like, of course, like, that was the wrong decision. And initially, this is that kind of putting stuff behind you and moving on to the next thing. The lowest point was probably that, because I came to selection for one reason, and that's to be a JTAC, whether it's at the 17th or at another 2 series, and I'm being debriefed on things that I know how to do, and I should have performed better at that, and that was, for me, that was the lowest part. Not it had nothing to do with physical stress or anything like that, but just knowing that, like, I'm here for a reason, and it's to be a JTAC for one of these units. And the one thing that, like, I should be performing well at, I really struggled with at that point. So I took the debrief items, and, I walked out of the sim, and I took some time to think about what was briefed to me and what's applicable and what I can use, like, throughout the rest of the selection, and the items that, like, I can't use right now, I just tried to, like, drop them so that it wasn't on my mind. And I just decided at that point, like, what's done is done, and they have formulated what they think they know my capabilities are or are not. And, like, there's nothing I can do about what has already happened. And now it's about, like, what else is going to be coming up.
Yeah, awesome. And I want to backtrack a little bit because you keep mentioning the guys who came from the 17th that were at your unit out in the ASOS world. What was it about them? Can you put that in attribute form, or just what were the things that you noticed about those guys that kind of led you to say, and that's probably the guy's footsteps that I want to follow in?
So first off, whenever I showed up to the 14th, one of them had PCS the same week to the 14th that I showed up. So we kind of were doing in processing together. And first off was appearance and professionalism. It was just something about the way that they integrated and had conversations with people, and the respect that was there. The one that I was in processing with, this was my first assignment. So, like, he had never been to the 14th either, but he was basically taking me under his wing, per se, and helping me get through everything that I needed to get through, which that wasn't his responsibility. I wasn't even his guy, but he knew that somebody was going through the process as well, and he was familiar with it. So he just helped me out and brought me along the way. And then outside of just the professionalism, it was everything that we did in training, regardless of whether it was taking care of the vehicles, whether it was controlling aircraft, whether it was jump operations. Everything that they did, they had the same attitude towards it as far as, like, importance goes, and, like, detail and not cutting corners. And it's just, they did that in everything that we did. And I hadn't seen that before up to this point. Obviously, I'd just gone through the schoolhouse, and then I just showed up there, but there was a significant difference in how they carried themselves and handled business as opposed to some of the others. And I'm not going to say all of the others, because there's guys all over the career field that have that same manner. But this was, like, day one, Bryan showing up, seeing it for himself.
Yeah, I wanted to get that out of you because, with your life experience and the hard work you probably had to put in those oil fields, which I can imagine is probably brutal on some or most days, and then your college experience. I think, the older we are, the better we are at seeing what right looks like. And so that's interesting to hear your perception of them as you're moving into your first tactical unit at the 14th. So I appreciate that answer. And I know as we move into the training aspect of what happened after you were chosen to go to the 17th, and all of that's changing on the backside now. But what was that experience like once you got done with ANS? How did you get to Det 1? What was the process in between there?
So the process at the time was we went to AST down at STS in Florida, and it was 3 months. And some of the things that we covered were AIEs. We had a planning course. It was a 2-week course that was contracted, and basically we went over the whole gambit of planning for different mission sets, as well as different positions that you may hold within those mission sets. Additionally, there was some shooting courses. We did some airborne operations, which it was all static line for us because none of us were free fall qualified, but we got to do some static line jumps into the sound there. That was a first time for me. I'd never done any deliberate water jumps at all. And then we got to do some ATV training, which all this stuff was really fun training. Like I enjoyed every bit of it. We did some contract casts, and that was my first time working with contract casts. Prior to that, we'd always worked with DoD aircraft, and so we had a week that was kind of in the middle of AST where we controlled cast local there in Florida, and then we drove down to Avon Park at the end and kind of did our last week with full mission profiles out there with live ordnance. So the whole process, there were a lot of things that I had never done before, and it was a good time.
Knowing what you know now, for the guys who are going to get picked up and who are going to go through training in the future, even though it's probably not going to be down at STS anymore, what are the things they need to take away from that training piece? Whatever it is, what do they need to show up at their first det knowing?
So now that the process has changed, I'm pretty sure that we're going to be holding their training in-house, which I think is a great thing because guys that are coming to 17th, we have a different mission set than a lot of units out there. And there are some things that we do that are particular to the customers that we support. So, I mean, I wish that I had that prior to showing up to the 17th. How specific of training they're going to get it's just going to translate. It's going to be seamless whenever they actually show up to their teams, which is great. But right now, in preparation prior to actually starting their initial training at the unit, the biggest things are continue doing the things that they've done to prepare themselves to get here because they were chosen for a reason. It wasn't out of luck. It was out of preparation on their part. And so they shouldn't take that lightly. Like they obviously put in the work to get there. So continuing to do what they've been doing, and then additionally, like stay healthy, taking care of themselves, staying out of trouble, and just show up with an open mind because there's going to be a lot of things that are new and some things that may be taught differently, but there's a reason behind that. And you may not see the reason initially, but it will come eventually, and there's going to be that time that like the light bulb clicks and it's going to be that's why moment for those guys. So that's the biggest thing. I think it's gonna be awesome. It's a great opportunity, and I wish that I had this training prior to coming to the unit.
Yeah, well said. Well said on all fronts, man. That was great. When you got to Det 1 in Savannah, let's just say as you were traveling there after your training was finished, what were some of the fears that you had?
Prior to getting down there, I was a little bit, probably nervous about like, hey, I'm the new guy. We'll see how this goes, kind of thing. Which, like, I was way off in what I had imagined in my head things were going to be like. Additional fear was my experience. Like, I had limited experience. I had one deployment under my belt. I had been a JTAC for just over a year. Maybe a little bit longer, but I just didn't have a lot of experience. So showing up there, I knew that a lot of these guys had like 2 minimum deployments before they even showed up to the 17th, some of them more than that. So just the experience difference there, that was a little bit nerve-wracking for me, which is good too, because like those uncomfortable situations are where you see the most growth. And I think a lot of times people get comfortable, myself included, we get in those comfortable positions and it's like life is easy, but there's not growth in those moments. And it's when you take a step out of that comfort zone and you experience situations and you're put in environments that like either you've never been in before or that you didn't even know existed. And like that's when you really grow, not only as a human being, but as an operator as well. So looking back, those were some of my fears, but like those fears turned into uncomfortable situations, which turned into growth, which put me where I'm at now. Hopefully I'm able to pass on those experiences to the new coming guys that are coming into the squadron. And I hope that they receive and benefit from the same situations that I did.
Yeah, if you say it just like you're saying it on this podcast, when I get there, brother, you're gonna hit the nail on the head for sure. Let's talk about your time at the 17th a little bit. So just for the audiences, like I always say, I always get a disclaimer. We got to keep it on the unclassed side. A lot of stuff that he has done at the 17th is over on the classified side. So we're going to keep it on the right side of the fence for this one. But how was it, Bryan, when you went and started conducting your training and in operations with First Bat?
I showed up a month before they were about to head down range. So I got one little cash trip in prior to them heading out to guys that needed to green up some things. And then that was all I got to do before they went out the door. But on my first cast trip, we were up in Boise, Idaho, and I'd never heard like how they do things. I'd never been on the radio listening, and I was sitting in the back of a Suburban, and we had driven to the MOA, and they had just kicked off the scenario, and I just remember sitting there listening to the JTAC that was controlling, and I was trying to follow along. ATAC was still somewhat new to me because I didn't really use that when I was at the 14th ASOS, and he just kept going, and as the scenario went on, I was just like, I was having a hard time keeping up. And I was just, in my head, I was like, I know he's got experience and he's been here a while. I hope that one of these days, like, I can get to this point and I can be this capable at doing my job. But that was my first experience. They ended up deploying. I stayed home, and with that, they tied me right into our ops that's here at Benning, and they started getting me integrated with the guys at Benning and our detachment that's up in Washington. So I kind of ended up bouncing all over the place, jumping on TDYs with the other two teams, which is really fortunate because with the rotations that we have, a lot of times, like, guys in Savannah don't see guys in Washington besides in a RIP, and it could be just that one guy that you're replacing. So a lot of times guys will come and go, and you see new names within the squadron, and you're like, I don't even know who this is. And it's the nature of the beast. But I had the opportunity to get to both locations on multiple instances for training, and I got to meet pretty much all of the guys within the squadron. So it was a great opportunity to meet some really solid guys and then to get on some great training. So we did some shooting courses, driving courses, a lot of cast trips. And that was kind of unique to my situation in the timing that I showed up to the unit. But when it comes down to a regular training cycle, you're going to get basically like the MLAT portion of the training, which you get to see big picture when a battalion moves, what all goes into that, and it's a lot of moving pieces. And then we had company live fire, platoon live fire, so you get to see at the more basic levels how these guys move and operate. And then we go into our validation training prior to deployment. And that's where basically throughout the year, every part task training that we've accomplished, you kind of combine it all into one, and you put it into a week of full mission profiles based off of things that we think we may see in the deployed environment. And that for me was extremely eye-opening. It's one thing to do a little bit of training here and a little bit of training there, and then at the end of it, they just combined everything and see like how the machine works, and it was a great experience.
Explain, if you would, to the audience. So you probably have a lot of TACPs in the ASOS community listening to this in the future. And as you talked about that training cycle, and you talked about the battalion level movements down to the company size, down to the team size, a lot of those ASOSs are doing some of the same things with the Army units they're supporting. What's the difference, though?
The biggest difference that I noticed is the relationships that our JTACs have with not only the platoon leadership, but the company leadership and the battalion leadership. Our guys are over there 3 or 4 times a week. And, a lot of times our guys are over there and their companies like integrating, and whether it's training or whether they're planning or whether they're just hanging out with the guys, the relationships, I've never seen like Air Force Army relationship as close and as tight as what our guys have over there. And it's the amount of respect that their staff has for our guys. It just shows like what's been built upon over the last years of hard work and guys like sweating and bleeding over it. They paved the way, and then the new guys coming into the unit, they're being brought up the same way, and that's one thing that hasn't changed. I haven't seen a change in it since I showed up, is just that interaction and I get, for lack of a better word, like that that family feeling. You feel like I don't feel like an attachment over there, an enabler. I've never once felt like an enabler over there. I actually feel like I'm part of their company.
Yeah, great way to put it. Man, throughout your time there, when did you just stop and look? Maybe it was on a training cycle, maybe it was on deployment. When did you just like stop and look around like, man, I can't even believe this is my life right now. This is awesome beyond expectation. Like, when was that moment?
That moment was my first deployment with the 17th, and I would like equate it to playing football in high school, and you practice and you practice and you practice, and you never get a game. You continue to practice, and you start to kind of develop that attitude of what for. And it's not the right attitude to have, but that's kind of where I was prior to. We would train and train and train, and then like I wasn't getting the fulfillment of playing that game, nor was it the game that like I originally bought off on. So that moment for me was my first deployment with the 17th, and I got out on my first target, and it was just kind of surreal. And we got back that night, and nothing happened. This is the craziest thing. Nothing happened. I did not release ordnance. Like, I controlled sensors, but I did exactly what I thought I was signing up for, and just the gratification that I got out of that on a personal level, that's all that mattered to me. And it's the same for me every time I get to go out. It's that fulfillment of this is what I researched, and this is why I joined the Air Force, and I'm continuing to get to do it, and like, that's it.
Man, love that answer. Love it. It was just making me think. I've never really thought about that in my own life and career. And I remember this was in March, I think, of 2002. We were infilling a long way into a target, and I was going to be the primary JTAC on the scene. And as the helicopters were getting nearer, we're already tuned into the fires network, and things start crackling. I'm just coming into range of the line of sight comms, and then I hear a lot of talking, and then you see what looks like lightning on the horizon. And as our helicopters are coming in, the whole world around the target is just blowing up. Like, the AC-130 gunship is having its way with whatever's around it. The Apache gunships are having its way with whatever's around it. And before I even got on the ground, before I ever even got to key the mic on anything, like, that moment solidified everything that I'd done up to that moment in my life. Like, this was it. I was at the place I was supposed to be. So I love hearing these stories, man, because just like you said before, you didn't really do anything on target, man, for that one go, but it meant the world to you because it finally validated everything that you have done up in your life until then. And it's just special. I appreciate you sharing that. I also want to put out there, and we try to be as honest as we can, because these are aimed at recruiting people. We need people to come up and join our organizations so they can help us solve these problems. But man, when you're working with the customers you guys work with and the daily life inside the 17th, they're eating a bunch of unicorns running around inside the squadron, and they're eating a bunch of rainbows outside every day. So what are some of those challenging things that you've dealt with since you've been there, so guys can understand what they're getting into before they put their application in?
It's funny that you bring this question up, because whenever I joined the military, I was single. I didn't have a family. And I pretty much, my career has been my single focus the entire time, and it makes things really easy. It made life easy, and I was able to, like, any TDY that came up for training, like, I'm on it, and I'm bettering myself, and it's not hard to progress and be good at your job and all that in the military when you're single. It wasn't until last year when I got married that the whole rainbows and unicorns, that's when it all kind of set in for me, because at the end of the day, like, family is what matters. And I love being in the military, and I want to do a full 20 and retire, but when it's all said and done, like, the military is not going to be there when I punch that time card, and it's my family that's going to be there now. And so the biggest thing is a balance, right? So, and I'm still learning. I think a lot of people are learning, whether they've been married for a year or whether they've been married for 15 years. But for me personally, this last year has been one of the biggest learning experiences for me, because I'm married now. I've got a stepdaughter, and they matter to me, and work matters to me. And trying to figure out that balance of, like, can I still be good at my job? Can I still be proficient and not volunteer for everything that's put out on the table, and not take away from my family more than we already asked them to give up? And so, the answer is yes. Like, you can still be proficient at your job. You can still be a phenomenal operator, an NCO, a leader, and be a father and a husband at home. It takes a lot of work, but it's definitely possible. And prior to coming to the 17th, we didn't have staff that was there for the families and supported the families, their needs. And not only when we're deployed, but when we're home as well. And that's one thing that, like, the 17th has provided. And I know that everybody's making this more of a priority now, but I just hadn't seen it before. And I know that they truly care about the families, and you have people and resources there that are available to help facilitate whatever your family needs at that time. And that's been one of the biggest blessings of being part of this unit is, yeah, we work together, and it's a job, but it's also a family, and people look out for each other. And, some people don't want to hear it. Sometimes they don't want to ask for help, or they just, they want to handle it themselves, but it's always there. And regardless of how many times you say no, that one time you say yes, they're going to be there to help. And I think that's huge.
Long time ago, I had a buddy who was retiring, and at his retirement ceremony, he was a controller, and it's retirement ceremony. The command that we work for never stops, and that was his point. He's like, you could stick your hand in a bucket of water, pull your hand out, and the time that it takes that water to collapse back in on the hole where your hand was is how long they're going to miss you when you walk out of this building. And I laughed, but
That's so true.
It is. And I started paying attention to it, and he was so right. The machine's not going to stop. I see too many of our operators really get bought into the I'm an operator piece, and they let everything else in their life kind of crumble down around that ego mountain that they're building for themselves. And then when they pull that hand out of the bucket of water, there's nothing left standing around them. So I just hope everybody listens to what Bryan said today, because, man, it resonated with me. And it's about finding the balance outside of just your job. Be the best you can be at your job, but then go home and be the best you can be at home too. So, all right. So, Bryan, so as we're rounding third, man, and bring this home. So imagine you're on stage, you're talking to every ASOS TACP that exists out there, and maybe even some in the pipeline, and maybe some who are still the Bryan out in the civilian community who's looking at making this a job. What can you offer them? What should they be doing now? What would you tell them to prepare them for an assignment at the 17th?
So first off, what I would say is the best time is now. The longer that you wait to submit an application, the more chances there are for things to come up, whether it be family or work related. And there's no better time really than now. Why the 17th? For me personally, and that's all I can speak to, is that the 17th has provided me the opportunities to do every bit of training and execution downrange that I thought I was going to be doing when I initially joined the Air Force and joined as a TACP. It's provided me those opportunities, and it's provided me opportunities that I didn't even know existed. Additionally, the relationships that are built within the 17th and those that we work with, I haven't seen anything better out there in my time. And then the squadron itself, just how they care for the individual operator, and then additionally those families as well, and how willing they are to provide for those families in times of needs. That's the biggest thing that I can speak to for the 17th, and why I would do it now, and I would choose the 17th again if I had to.
Man, love it. Love all those answers. And Bryan, it was really good to talk to you today. I hope this resonates out into the TACP community, but I also want to add that we also hire for the support positions inside the 17th as well. So this sounds like a unit that you want to be a part of, and you're a supporter, and you want to come out and help give back and provide for the nation. This is an opportunity for you as well. Bryan, thanks so much for spending an hour with me today, buddy. I appreciate it.
Hey, Mr. Free, I appreciate you having me on here, and anybody that has questions, just reach out. Guys are more than happy to answer those questions. Thanks for your time.